Most new bookkeepers assume this is a complicated topic. It isn't, but misunderstanding it can quietly create big problems inside a set of books. Once this clicks, bookkeeping starts to feel so much more intuitive. At its core, bookkeeping is about timing. We're constantly deciding when something belongs in the financial records, not just when money moves, but when the business activity actually happened. And those two things don't always line up. When you start noticing that difference, you naturally shift from simply recording transactions into thinking like a professional bookkeeper. So let's start with cash accounting, because it's the most straightforward. Cash accounting is exactly what it sounds like. You record income when the money hits the bank and expenses when the money leaves. It mirrors what business owners see when they open their banking app, which is why it feels really natural. It's also how most of us think about money in our own lives. When your paycheck lands, you feel more comfortable spending. When a large bill clears, you notice it immediately. For example, imagine a photographer who shoots a wedding in December but doesn't get paid until January. Under cash accounting, that income shows up in January because that's when the cash arrived. But sometimes that simplicity can paint a slightly misleading picture of how a business is actually performing. If a business collects a large payment upfront for work they haven't completed yet, that bank balance might look strong, but there's still an obligation sitting in the background. The money is there, but the work is still owed. This is usually the moment bookkeepers realize our role isn't just to track bank activity, it's to understand what's truly happening inside the business. And that's where accrual accounting brings clarity. Accrual accounting records income when it's earned and expenses when they're incurred, regardless of when cash moves. So instead of asking, did the money arrive? We ask, did the work happen? Let's go back to our photographer. The wedding took place in December, which means the revenue was earned in December, which means it's recorded in December. When the payment arrives in January, it simply clears what was owed. It doesn't create new revenue. A helpful way to remember this is cash shows where the money is, and accrual shows how the business is actually doing. Accrual gives business owners a clear view of profitability, trends, and overall financial health, which becomes more important as businesses grow. Now, this is where many bookkeepers start wondering, can businesses just choose whatever method they want? Not exactly. There are regulatory guidelines in both Canada and the US, and they tend to push businesses towards accrual, especially as they mature. In Canada, accrual accounting is generally the expectation, especially for corporations, because it presents a more accurate picture of income. Cash accounting is really only permitted in a few specific industries like farming and fishing and some sole proprietorships. The US is a bit more flexible. Many smaller businesses can use cash accounting, but once a business reaches a certain size, carries significant inventory, or requires more formal financial reporting, accrual typically becomes necessary there as well. So while cash is common in the earlier stages, growth usually pulls businesses towards accrual. That said, what often shows up in real-life bookkeeping is something slightly different, and we call this hybrid accounting. Hybrid simply means a blend of cash and accrual approaches, and it's extremely common in small businesses. For example, a business might recognize revenue when it's earned, but record those smaller expenses when they're paid instead of tracking every minor little payable. The goal isn't to build the most complicated set of books possible, it's to create financial statements that are clear, reliable, and useful for decision-making. Overcomplicating rarely serves a growing business. And by the time a business hires a bookkeeper, they're almost always operating in accrual accounting already, whether they even realize it or not. The moment you begin tracking unpaid invoices, bills not paid yet, payroll liabilities, loans, retainers, or inventory, you've stepped beyond pure cash accounting, and now you're working in accrual. This is one of those skills that becomes more intuitive with experience. Over time, you'll review financial statements and instinctively notice when something belongs in a different period. That's the professional instinct forming. Instead of trying to memorize rules, focus on building one powerful habit. Notice timing differences. Whenever money and activity happen in different periods, pause and ask, where does this transaction truly belong? If revenue has been earned but not collected, or an expense relates to work that hasn't been paid for yet, you're almost always looking at an accrual situation. It's also important to remember that you're typically not the person deciding which accounting method a client uses for tax purposes. That guidance comes from their accountant. Your role is to maintain clean, logical books that support accurate reporting no matter which method is ultimately applied. So before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a perspective that will serve you throughout your career. Great bookkeepers don't simply follow the bank feed. They understand the story behind the numbers. Cash shows movement in cash. Accrual shows actual performance, and hybrid keeps the books practical without losing clarity. If this topic has ever felt intimidating, remember that you're learning a professional way of thinking, and that takes time. With every client you support and every reconciliation you complete, your confidence will grow and your instincts will sharpen. One day you'll open a set of books and realize that what once felt complicated now feels completely natural. And that's usually the moment you recognize how much your expertise has developed. If you want more lessons like this that help you build real confidence in a profitable bookkeeping business, make sure you're subscribed. I'm so glad you're here, and I'll see you in the next lesson.